we're getting close. In this installment of the miter saw station build, I go ahead and build the tops for the drawer banks, and I show you how to do it out of some select cherry. So way back when, you remember this, I hope, I made a story stick for my countertop when we were going through the design, which you all helped me with. So I wanted the depth of 600 millimeter on my cabinets, which we have, plus I wanted another 40 millimeter overhang for the drop edge we're gonna do. So it looks like I calculated this part perfect. Now we're going to maximize the sheet of plywood we have, and I'll show you how I did that. So before going over the measurements of this sheet and how we're going to cut it, always remember, I want to start from a fresh cut edge to take out any of the undulations in that factory edge. So I want to maximize my sheet here of this cherry plywood, and I want to get both countertops out of it. So the length overall, according to my story stick, is I need 640 millimeters. We just ripped the edge. Let's check to see what we got. We got 1,230. So calculating the curve of the blade, I'm gonna go with 610. And here's the reason why. I have this leftover curly cherry, and I just thicknessed it, but I also ripped it to 30 millimeters. So I can get two 610 millimeters out of this with just a little left over. And then when I add this edge here of 30 millimeters, it will add up to 640. So let's get ripping. So pretty simply, we're just gonna set up the FS parallel guides, lock them in, and set the scale here to 610. So let's get the two 610 millimeter rips out of this sheet. Let's take a measurement now that we've applied molding on the edges, so we get the right length and incorporate the 30 millimeters on each side for that hardwood dropped edge. Now, a lot of people will reach out all the time and say, boy, you like using a folding rule. Well, here's why. I'm going to come in here and you're going to see this molding has that profile on it. I want to get an exact measurement, so I put it up against there and bring my folding rule there, and then I can come down here and get that exact measurement I need, and maybe a little leeway. So I have my 610 rip here, and the first thing I'm going to do is put a perfect 90 on here. So I always make that mark because that is perfectly square. And now I'm gonna flip it around because we gotta take that measurement over there that we just took, and that was 1,330 millimeters. So the center of the countertop is cherry plywood. That's what we ripped and cross-cut. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do what I call a drop edge, but we're gonna do a three-way miter on this. So what I did is I did a quick mock-up. I took a piece of scrap plywood, and this is my cherry, okay? And we have that reveal down here, so that'll sit, and that'll look really nice and thick over there on the miter saw station. I always do mock-ups to get started. So I picked the grain I want on my front edge, and let's establish the first miter. This is the top, and I always want to work from the top. But because it's a dropped edge, it's a little bit thicker, I want to get on a level playing field. This is why making a mock-up is really a great thing to do. Because I could take a measurement and go, oh look, the drop, because this is the bottom, is about 8 millimeter. So what I want to do, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to take some 8 millimeter dominoes and raise this up, just like that. So those 8 millimeter shims, the dominoes, make it a level playing field. So I just cut a piece of scrap, and I want to bring it in here to the miter and that's absolutely perfect where I want it. So I'm gonna lock that short point right there so I could take my measurement down there. So now that I have it locked down at that end and I know my short point is a perfect line down there, I will take this and make a mark here, and I'll just use that as my reference like that, so I know how to cut this on the miter saw. This is why I always say to creep up to your line, because I only have so much material and I am just slightly proud. So now I'll go back to the saw and cut a little bit more. Let's check the miter. I'm going to take my offcut here and bring it in, and that miter is absolutely spot on. Okay, so we have our front piece locked to the board, so there's no shifting. We verified it right here with our gauge block, spot on. So what I did is I just took one of these pieces, brought it in, cut the miter. It's exactly where I want it, but here's what I'm gonna do. I wanna leave it right here a little long, so I'm gonna cut this at 90. You'll see why. Okay, so there's going to be a pretty simple layout with the domino. I'm going to make a mark here and come just like this. I'm going to come from the back about the same distance. Okay, I'm using my saddle square as a quick reference. Then I'm going to do a quick measurement here, and I'm going to get that. That's 640, so half of 640 is what? 320, and I'll make a mark. So I'm going to do 3 from each side on the sides. The front edge, I'll come in the same way, right from the edge here, and I'll make a mark here, and also here. And then I'll find the center, and then do 2 in the center there. There'll be 5 on the front, 3 on each side. Okay, I have all my layout lines exactly where I'm going to put my dominoes. Now, this is the technique that I like to use, where in the hardwood, I'll use the tight setting, and in the plywood, I'll use that middle setting, which gives me 3 millimeters of play on either side. That way there, when I put this together and we do the glue up all at once, I have that ability for adjustment here. We're gonna break this apart in a minute and go over to the MFT and start my domino joinery. But before I do that, I wanna make sure I even label even more so I don't get confused when I get over there. So remember, the plywood is gonna be a loose setting. I'll put an L, and here on the hardwood, I'll put a T. But there's another mark I wanna do because I've extended the line out. I will also make a point here and here at each line, so you know that's where the domino goes to that line. It's the inside. So let's get joining. We're gonna use a 5x30 domino. I just checked the cutter because that's the thickness of the domino we're using. It's a 5x30. And the length is the 30. So we have to set our plunge depth here at 15. Now, we're gonna do this, all these mortises on the plywood in the loose setting, so I have it set at the loose setting, the center setting. Now, here's the most important part. On the plywood, we're gonna set the height of the plate with the gauge block at 20. Okay, so here's one of my favorite things to show people when it comes to using the domino and the gauge block here. If you understand plywood, sometimes plywood has undulations in it. So if I had left this setting at 20, which is the thickness of this board here that appears in a window, what happens is when I put this edge on, it could dip below the plywood and it wouldn't look right. So what I'd like to do is make it ever so proud. And I could set this at 22, but that would leave me a full millimeter to sand flush or scrape or hand plane flush. What I like to do is leave it at 20 and take a 0.5 shim stock and put it right here on the gauge block, and that gives me the perfect reveal to sand and plane flush. So always remember, labeling is so important because I have to switch my setting, which I did, to the tight setting, and I am gonna leave that gauge block because I just locked it down with the fence. and we're ready to start working. Okay, so the thickness of the edge is 25 millimeter. And when you look at the setup here on the MFT, it may look like I'm working off of the base, but I'm really not. I'm working off the plate. And because of that 25 millimeter thickness / 1 inch, it keeps me above the plane of the table. So I can stabilize it just like this. So let's see how we did, but let's prepare our area for dry fit, always dry fit, and also for glue up. So what I'm gonna do is I get these rips left over, 12 millimeter. That'll give us plenty of clearance, and I'm just gonna slide them underneath. So it never fails. I always like to show people this. Dry fit, dry fit, dry fit. But sometimes these tenons get a little tight. Do not lose your glue line and sand these. What I like to do is just knock the rib off real quick, and dry fit on either side, and dry fit goes really simple after that. So let's get this together, and let's see, nice and easy, take your time. Oh my God, that is a perfect reveal there, so we can sand that perfectly flush. Okay, so this is why we go loose on the plywood and tight on the hardwood. When we put this together, okay, in dry fit, but we'll also do it in glue up, this will make glue up go effortless because we could take that, we have that little wiggle room to bring our miter in absolutely perfect. And boy, I really like that. It's very, very, very slight reveal there for sanding flush. Dry fit went well. Everything lined up perfect. Now comes the glue up process. And this is where I take a few minutes before, make sure I have all my clamps laid out. I make sure I have all my dominoes ready to go. Every tool that I'll probably use in assembly, plus a bucket of water with some well wrung out rags. Now, we're gonna start to glue up and we'll show you the process. So I'm gonna put the glue on the top edge here because there's a little drop edge underneath. So I'll just do this and spread it out. I use a very high-tech spreader. It's called my finger. Okay, I'll just take it like this. Now, you've seen me do this before in videos. I really like to do this because I've never had a failure. What I'll do is, because of the little indentations on the surface that's going to adhere for long grain to long grain adhesion, I just butter the domino and insert it. Making sure that glue stays right there. Okay, everything lines up. Now let's get them into clamps. And I'm gonna put them, the long ones, from side to side, just like this. Now, I'm not putting a ton of pressure on it right at the moment. I'll put one on either end. All my marks are lining up, but just enough pressure to bring it in close enough so I could check my miters all the way around. And start to bring them in, just like this, and checking my miters here. I'm gonna come here, in here to get a little tightness here to make sure I'm hitting it exactly where I want it. It's all lining up. So I have one here and I have one here. Boy, this is the beauty of these K-bodies. You can bring it right in effortlessly. And as I start to really tighten up here, because that is the area I really needed it, was that miter, and that's coming together absolutely perfect. The best thing I can tell you about glue up is don't lose your cool. Just go through the process nice and steady. And now the only thing we got to do is wait for it to dry. Woo! Time to take the clamps off. So the next part of the process is eliminating this edge that we did at that 5 millimeter, and that is perfectly flush. I wish I had flush vision. So I'm gonna step you through a process that I use to make sure that this hardwood edge is level with the plywood. And it is so important to creep up on it or work your way up to it so you don't damage that plywood and have burn through. Okay, so the first tool I'm going to use to work it up even is this hand plane. It's a smoother. Now, What you really need is a very fine shaving, so practice on another piece of wood before you attempt to start this, because you don't want to scrape into the plywood. You'll get tear out, especially on cross grain, even though I'm going long grain here. So also make sure you adjust the throat, very precise and as close as you can to that blade, so you'll prevent a lot of tear out that way. So as I'm planing, you'll notice that I'm keeping the plane away from the plywood, so I don't want to cut into it. I do have that 0.5, so it's going to take a little while to get it down close. And I'm just going to take very fine shavings. So the next step, after I am close, not quite perfectly flush. There's some areas I've gotten really close to flush, and there's some, because of this curly cherry's got a little nasty grain to it, I'm going to start to hand scrape. So the nice thing about scraping, and you know you're getting right where you want to be flush, is I always watch these lines right here, my mark, and when I start to scrape some of those away, I know I'm where I want to be. As I'm starting to scrape this outside edge here, I'm going to be scraping also cross grain on the plywood. This is where you can get some serious tear out, so you got to be very aware. Now this is a new scraper in my shop, and I really like it because you'll notice this is my scraping action, but it actually turns up a little. So if I aim it just right, it doesn't cut in to the plywood cross grain. And it is a very thick scraper, and it works wonderful. Okay, so leveling the edge to the plywood. This is our final part of the process. It's not the final sanding though. So what I want to do is concentrate on making sure it's flush, but not letting the sander sit. So I'm taking it very gently, and I got 150 paper on here. Now, one of the things that people have a tendency of doing is concentrating on removing the pencil marks and all of that. Well, guess what? You're close to the edge, and that's where you'll get burned through. So what I'd like to do, it's a process of leveling, go back and forth, to and fro, in 6 to 8 inch circles. That way there it stays perfectly flat. And one of the things is not to concentrate in one area. The final sanding will come at the very end after we put the profile on. Okay, I didn't overdo. I'm perfectly flush all the way around. I still have a pencil mark or two, but I'll take care of that on my final sanding of 180. Let's head over to the MFT and let's do some routing with our round over bit. So the next part is pretty simple. From the top, I'm going to put the first radius on with this round over bit I've chosen. All right, so I really like that profile. Now I'm gonna flip it over and do this side here. Okay, when you're routing on a very narrow edge, there's a tendency for this to tip. What you need to do is be very aware of keeping this solid and flat on that 30mm profile. All right, mission accomplished. The profile is on both sides. I can fare that out with an interface pad when I do my final sanding. But there's one more step. I want to flush cut these little horns that we left long, and we'll take care of that right away. So it's a really simple process to flush these oversized edges to the plywood. And this is the perfect solution, is the track saw. So I'm just going to line up right here all the way Okay, that'll flush trim it to the back edge of the countertop. Now with something like this, I definitely clamp it because I definitely don't want this to move. We have all this work into this. It just takes a couple of seconds to grab a clamp and slide it in and lock it. Oh yeah, now we just gotta get the final sanding and a little Rubio monocoat on that and we're good to go. After the radius profile was successful, I sanded everything to 180 grit, taking great care on blending the profile with a 6-inch interface pad to achieve a perfect bull nose with no flat spots, no saw marks, and a perfect blend. I then cleaned both pieces with Rubio cleaner, and I let it dry for a little over an hour, making sure it was thoroughly dry. And then I applied Rubio Pure to the tops and let it dry for a day. Voila! It's finished. Finally. Thank you for your patience for following our journey to make my last miter saw stand. Now, I think the greatest slide compound miter saw has a fantastic place to live in a great miter saw station. So, thanks for hanging in that journey with us. We've got several videos that you can review. Hey, we got a lot more builds coming, and I just want to mention something. I don't think I've ever said this. Could you please subscribe if you've been watching and following along, and hit that notification bell so you can see everything that we produce. Hey, and as we always say from the SedgeTool shop, be positive and stay sharp, and we mean wicked sharp.